Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're just going to talk about attack angles. Someone was asking could I give a good explanation of attack angles versus raker depth, so I thought why not. But first of all, attack angle, we've got a tooth here, so that's what it looks like there. And if we put the digital gauge on top, we get a reading of about 5.5. So what that is telling us is that this angle here is 5.5 degrees. This is referred to the attack angle. Now, attack angles are in many things. Even in aeroplanes, when they talk about the aeroplane wing and the leading edge and the trailing edge and the way that the wind hits it at a certain angle. So when you lift up the ailerons and the nose of the plane lifts up, and the wings are attacking the wind at a certain angle to give lift. When a golfer strikes a ball, he swings his clubs, and he contacts the ball, which is generally between the middle of his legs. That's called the attack angle. When a carpenter uses a plane, the blade in the plane is probably about 30 degrees, something like that there. That is called the attack angle. So attack angle is used to describe many different ways that a tool either enters a bit of timber or even if it's on a metal lathe. So if I hold this chisel and I move it backwards and forwards, it won't do anything because we've got 0 degrees. So if we take this and zero it, I'll just zero that again. We've got 0 degrees on here. But if we lift it up to about 5 degrees, we'll just try and do that again. We'll just zero it. Oh, that's good enough. I'll lift it up to about 5 degrees as best as possible. And now it starts to bite into the timber. As you can see, I need a bit of force to... As you can see, it doesn't take much, but if I lower it down, it doesn't work. So the attack angle on a chainsaw works much better at 5 degrees. As we slowly grind the tooth away to the end of where this red mark is, that's the end of life. The attack angle will decrease if you're going to use one of these flat type constant gauges. You will not be able to maintain an attack angle of around 5. By the time you get to the end of the life using one of these gauges here, your attack angle will be about 2 degrees. 2 degrees will mean that you're sawing sawdust. The only way to maintain a accurate attack angle of around about 5 or 5.5 is to use a progressive depth gauge like this. There's different ones available. This is a still. This is for a 3/8 chain. Its number is FL4. So you've got FL1 for 1/4 inch, FL2 for 3/8 low profile, FL3 for 0.325, FL4 is for 3/8 standard, which is what this is, and FL5 is for 404 chain. So by using this progressive gauge that was invented by Ray Carlton back in the early 60s, I think it was about 1963, a lot of people use this type of gauge now. Now the other thing that happens, and we're talking about leverage, this is the pivot point of your tooth. Now, when a tooth on a chainsaw chain strikes a bit of timber, the raker comes down through movement, through this action. So you've got this rocking motion like this. So the moment that the timber strikes the tooth, the raker comes down and inhibits the tooth from taking any more timber. So that's the function of the raker gauge. What actually happens when a tooth is brand new like this, you'll find out that the leverage is different. So here is the point that rocks, this point. But have a look where the tooth is. The tooth is way over here. So the red dot should be way over here, the point of the tooth. But as we file it back, you'll find out that the leverage point goes behind the red dot here. So this becomes very, very sensitive. When the tooth is way back here, very, very sensitive to rocking. Plus the attack angle is reduced quite a lot. And on here, I've sort of exaggerated what would happen if you had a large tooth. And this is your pivot point here. And just say we had about a 7mm gap there. This might move 7mm, but this is not going to move much at all. So you've got to get your head around attack angles and the way that it works. Because if a tooth is only at 2 degrees attack angle, it's not going to cut timber very good at all. Whereas the optimal is about 6.3. That's the optimal. So with this type of raker gauge, you're going to get just below 5 on the hard setting, and you'll get just over 5 on the soft setting. 2 settings, soft and hard. They make them in Husqvarna. West Coast Saws in America make them. The inventor of it, which was Carlton, Ray Carlton, that invented it, it was brought by a company called Blount. After they brought it, they discontinued selling these progressive depth gauges. I don't know why. These type of gauges are only okay in the beginning when you start filing or grinding the chain. By the time you're getting near the halfway mark, you know, your attack angle has dropped right off. And as I said before, when we demonstrated having the chisel, if you've got a 0 degree attack angle, you won't chisel any timber. As you start to lift it up, that's referred to as the attack angle. And by the time you get round your 5 degrees, by the time you're at your 5 degree mark, like that, you're elevated, your chisel's going to dig into the timber. And this is the same thing that happens with the chainsaw tooth, that if the raker was at 0 degrees, the tooth would just slide along. Yeah, it'll just slide along. So the raker inhibits the angle. And as we file the tooth back more, we need to increase that angle. So it's not going to cut more. An example is, and I've actually done measurements, if we were to measure from a brand new tooth, and I've done this before, I got 0.7 of a millimetre, a little bit more than 0.65. By the time I get to the end of the life, I'm down to 1.4 millimetres in depth. So I've doubled the amount. Even though I've doubled the amount, but I've doubled the distance as well. So the distance from here to here is only just over 6 millimetres. By the time you get down to the end of life, the distance to here is almost 14 millimetres, just over 13 and a half. And that means that the rocking motion and the leverage is different between when the tooth is at this point and then when the tooth is at that point, because you're below the pivot point now. You're behind the pivot point. When the tooth is brand new, you're way in front of the pivot point. Then you've got to go 13. As you take 7 millimetres off the tooth, you're going to be behind the pivot point. So it's going to have a different effect on the rocking motion. The rocking motion isn't the main thing that contributes to the cutting, but it all works together with the attack angle. And you could imagine this tooth, this was an exaggeration, but you could imagine if the tooth was twice as long. So if we're on this angle now and the tooth was out here, our attack angle's going to be like this. Yeah, lucky if it's got a half a degree on it, which means it's not going to be able to tilt much. And if it can't tilt much, it won't bite into the timber. And this is the same effect as a chisel. If the angle is too shallow, it will not bite into the timber. And that's where people get confused, thinking, oh, the rakers are too deep. Oh, you've got 1.4 millimeters. That's 1.4 millimeters at end of life, because you've just increased double the distance from this point to this point here now. There's a big difference between here and here and here and here. Once you've got your head around that, if you were to put some ridiculous amount of raker depth on a brand new tooth like 1.4 millimeters, the thing's just going to bite in and bog down. It's not going to work properly because the attack angle would be incredible. I've never measured it. I should actually do that. Measure the attack angle at 1.4 millimeters in depth. It would be a huge attack angle and it would bite in so much. So hopefully you got your head around that and you understand that it's attack angle. And if you can maintain that attack angle, and that means that if this is your 5 degree attack angle and you can maintain it right through to the end of the life of the tooth, it's going to cut consistently and efficiently using one of these. The moment you use the constant depth gauge, your cutting is going to deteriorate. Yeah, so what we did on this rig here, this rig's set up so that we can measure attack angle. We've got a spring-loaded foot here that pushes down on the tooth, and a little cradle on here that holds the angle. So if you zoom in there, we'll see whether you can see that. That's a little spring-loaded little foot there. So that holds the tooth quite firmly, and when we put this in here, we can get an accurate reading. So what we actually did, and we've got a digital caliper on here so we can measure the height of the tooth or the height of the raker. So doing some experiments or some checking on certain chains. This is a piece of chain just off a roll. What I decided to do was to get a brand new tooth and grind the raker down from 0.7 of a mil, which was standard, down to 1.4 mil. Now, that's what we did on this tooth here, and we got an attack angle of 10.3. That's pretty much linear. So the way that it works, for every millimeter that you shorten the tooth, you need to go down 0.1 of a millimeter on the depth gauge, or the rakers. So if you were to take 7 millimeters off the tooth length, so a brand new tooth, a 3/8 chain, the tooth is approximately 10 millimeters in length. If you were to file or grind 7 mils off that, you would have to go down an additional 0.7 mil. So that's exactly what I did. To start with, I had 0.7 mil. I went an additional 0.7 mil. That was a total of 1.4, which is what we get at end of life. When we check the depth of a progressive depth gauge, we get 1.4 millimeters, anywhere from about 1.3 to 1.4. It depends on how much you file, whether you use the soft setting or the hard setting. So on 1.4 millimeters in depth, I was using the soft setting, and on the hard setting, I'd probably get about just under 1.3 total. So a little bit difference there. I tend to go for the soft setting. So that's probably it all about attack angles. They are essential in all sorts of woodwork. It doesn't matter whether it's a lathe or whatever it is. It's the same as when you look at a circular saw. There is the angle of the carbide tips that usually on there. Everything's at an angle so that when it strikes the wood, it's at the right correct angle. Most of the time when we're cutting wood, we're cutting against the grain, except if we're slabbing timber, we go with the grain. So attack angles are different when you go with the grain as opposed to going against the grain. Because when you go with the grain, you're probably milling anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees, where when you go across the grain, you can go anywhere from 25 to 35. Anyway, thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.